Stanford University.
Next week, Jack Copeland from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand will give a talk titled Turing, a Pioneer of the Information Age. That's part of the Turing Centennial series. And today I'm very honored to introduce Christos Papadimitriou from the University of California, Berkeley. Christos has been in all the top computer science departments in the world before Berkeley. He was at Athens, at MIT, he was even here at Stanford. It actually happened to be in Rome while I was an undergrad, so we go back a very long time. In all those places, Christos has done foundational work in several theoretical areas of computer science. He has worked on database theory, on computational complexity, on algorithms optimization. He was one of the founders of the computer science approach to the study of game theory. In each of those areas, Christos has been known for asking big questions and of taking a very broad view of what computer science is and where computer science thought can take us. And so very much in along these lines, today's talk will be on computer science perspective on evolution. Thank you, Chris.
Luca, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. It's always delightful to be back. Thanks for coming. I'm about to tell you perhaps the world's most fascinating story of the intellect, the theory of evolution. I don't know what we all know about Darwin. I don't know how many of you know that Darwin's grandfather was one of the great evolutionists before Darwin, because there were many natural scientists of that time, of the century before Darwin, who accepted the evolution as a fact. Erasmus was one of the greatest among them. Another great one was the Frenchman Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, who did some of the deepest work on the subject, on the best informed, except for one little flaw, that he was convinced that acquired traits can be inherited. Okay, so and that's not his fault. For some reason, nobody understands. This was a widespread belief among peasants at the time. You know that for example, injuries of animals can be inherited. Since we are interested in my topic is how computer science thought can influence this, I should mention that Charles Babbage, the computer's great-grandfather, was one of the early evolutionists. And if you allow me to paraphrase a little, he wrote a very nice paper in which he explains why evolution is not, believing in evolution does not contradict his Christian faith. And this is how he put it. He didn't use the word algorithm, but really he meant that. Okay, so. Then Darwin, 1959, wrote his book. So to the graduate students in the audience, you probably know that Darwin, when he was your age, 22-year-old, he didn't go to graduate school, but he went on a trip. Okay, and this trip changed his life like graduate school changes yours. Okay, and that's so that's where his example ends, because then he took him another 30 years to write his thesis. Okay, which I don't, you don't do. Okay, right. So Darwin's magnum opus was, of course, the formal foundation of the theory of evolution. Not because he was the first one who thought about it. As I told you, this was this idea that species evolve was really in the air. But because he did two things, he made explicit the belief that the theory that there is common ancestry, so that we all come from very few species. He meant one, but I believe he said very few. And then his real contribution was the revealing the engine of evolution, which is natural selection. It's at Berkeley, they read the Origin at a course on rhetoric, and I think that's very appropriate because it is, to my mind, the world's most masterful scientific argument. If you think about it, what he does is he, in chapter 1, so the English woman, old lady of the Victorian era, opens the book, and chapter 1 talks about pets, and it's irresistible. The woman thinks, the old lady thinks, wow, I knew that. Why didn't I never observe this? Okay, so and then he goes on to say animals in the wild, and so on and so forth. There were 6 editions, and believe it or not, in the web there is a phylogeny of the 6 editions. Okay, where basically points out the differences and so on. And one of the interesting differences is the mentions of the word God, which has a 2-year harmonic. Yeah. So yeah. So another famous incident. Darwin would have waited longer for publishing this. Nobody knows. He worked very hard. He wanted the argument to be extremely persuasive, but also sort of he had qualms about what this meant about his faith and most probably importantly his wife's faith. And the reason why what the incident that forced him to publish was the following. Probably is well known that another great scientist of that time, Wallace, he was some kind of Indiana Jones of the biological sciences. He was going off to Borneo and then coming back with crates full of snakes and orangutans, and would sell them to the British aristocracy and then finance his next trip to the Orient. In 1858, Wallace was lying in bed in Malaysia, sick with fever, with malaria, and right then he said, of course, natural selection. That's how species evolve. So the idea of natural selection came to him, and he figured everything out. And then he says, "Now what am I going to do? I'm stuck in this place." And so he decided to write a detailed letter about his discovery to the naturalist he respected most, and this happened to be Charles Darwin. And Darwin received the letter. We can all imagine that he fell off his chair, and he handled it with utmost integrity. He gave the letter to respected scientists of the time, and so they convened a meeting of the Linnean Society where this letter was read, and side to side with it, Darwin's letters to those scientists explaining his own rendering of the evolutionary idea. And you can, if you type on the search engine Darwin Wallace papers, you'll find you'll get these papers. It's 3 pages. There are 3 pages. It's really amazing reading. What is remarkable, especially in view of the special nature of my interest in this, that half of Darwin's paper is about defining and describing to the Victorians who had never seen such a phenomenon, exponential growth. So this is important for his argument, because he said, okay, this is what population, the theory of population predicts for the growth of population of species. Obviously, we don't see this. Why? And the reason is that life is a struggle, and only the fit survive. Okay, this is the beginning of his argument. Of course, he was very much influenced by the economist Malthus in studying the exponential growth. But I mean, it's quite interesting that this was such a big part of this argument that it was half of his original paper. So his paper was published. Incredible argument. One of the the greatest scientific arguments of the time, but many questions were left unasked. How does novelty arise? Okay, and this is a fantastic question in the following sense, or that evolutionists over the past actually a couple of decades, I mean, they have convinced us that it's plausible that from a primitive eye you can evolve the eye of a falcon or the eye of a fly, but it's sort of a little less obvious how you go from no eye to eye. Okay. So how does a completely new idea arise? Okay, that's an interesting question. Another interesting question is, what is the role of sex? By sex, I mean recombination, right? I mean, why is it that all the species we know, essentially, the way they procreate is by merging their genes? You know, why do we have a father and a mother? And this, of course, is true for even, when I say sex, I don't even necessarily mean genders, okay? Because bacteria do have sex. They do exchange genetic material. Darwin says about a dozen times in the Origin of Species that he does not understand sex. He does speak about sexual selection, but that's completely different. Sexual selection is basically the way whereby the peahen mates with the peacock that has the greatest tail. Okay, so but the role of what in some sense sex was considered at the time of Darwin one of the weaknesses of Darwin's theory, because sex seemed to the people, to the scientists at the time, that it limits diversity. Okay, because back then, sex was thought in the Aristotelian way, that basically you mix two liquids, okay? So, and out comes a mixture. And if you mix liquids enough, then you get something that is not diverse at all in the end, right? I mean, also how it seemed to be antagonistic, to go against the grain of Darwin's argument. All right? So after Darwin, lots of things happens. Let me stop at Augustus Weizmann, one of the greatest evolutionary theorists of his time, and one of his arguments was, in some sense, the most powerful argument against Lamarck, which says that, and I'm paraphrasing again in the interest of my computer science point of view, that the mapping from genotype to phenotype is one way. Definitely did not say one way, but really that's what he said. Okay, and therefore, since it's one way, there is no way whereby we can embed our life's experiences back in the genotype so that they are expressed back in the phenotype. Okay, and then genetics happened. Okay, so soon after Darwin, a Bohemian priest, I guess monk called Gregor Mendel, discovered the laws of heredity, and unfortunately for 35 years this was for 35 years this was kept a secret. I know that all of us are impatient about the impact our work has. I mean, so how many citations did this absolutely important paper have in the first 35 years? The answer is 3. And I have not read those 3 papers, but those who have say that these 3 people never read Mendel's paper. Okay, so I certainly never understood it. And amazingly, right now it would seem that the discovery of genetics, the discovery of the laws of heredity, would go a long way to strengthening Darwin's argument. But it turned out that to the scientists of the time, it seemed to be refuting it. Okay, and there was a crisis in the next 20 years. Mendelians against Darwinians, geneticists against gradualists, and in the process also the mathematics of population genetics was developed. And this scientific crisis, okay, sort of in the sense of Kuhn, gave birth to the new evolution, neo-Darwinism, or if you wish, the modern synthesis. And these are three of the top people who are responsible for this. Fisher is the same one who is considered the father of statistics. And during the next 30 years, using mathematics as the basic tool, these people redefined Darwinism and made it much more rigorous on the basis of the quantitative lessons of Mendelism. And still, big questions remain. Okay, so regarding the role of sex, one thing I want to emphasize is that it's also very relevant to ask. Sort of, I don't say it explicitly here. That there is a famous paper in the late 90s, review paper, whose title is "Why Sex?" Okay, and there are many reasons why this is a puzzling question. Okay, that sex has many disadvantages. It's evolutionary complexity of the processes is of course one. The energy the organism spends in this pursuit is the second. But there are much more compelling reasons why there is the load of sex, as it's called. For example, imagine a woman who has 2 children, right? And she looks at them and says, these 2 children have like a total of 1 copy between them of my DNA. And the other one comes from the off in the couch, okay? And then the woman says, why am I doing this to myself? Okay, so I could have, if I acted parthenogenetically, I would have created 2 children with 2 copies of my DNA, and therefore my genes would love that, okay? And the point is, okay, so why? Of course, one reason is that this way you get support for raising your children, okay? But this is true for 0.01% of all species, okay? So, so how about the rest, all right? Why do the others do it? And why sex? What is the advantage, the secret advantage of sex? Okay, so that's really the question. Speaking of which, of computer scientists thinking about evolution, here's a famous one. He asked this wonderful question: how do you find a 3 billion bit string in 3 billion years? Okay, so that's a wonderful question. And the amazing thing is that the very early theoretical computer scientist, mathematician, group theorist, and theoretical computer scientist Marcos Schuizenberger asked essentially the same question at a Y-Star conference where mathematicians of the time were called to think about evolution. So according to Valian, and I'm going to very briefly state his theory, he asked the question, which function, which traits of an organism can evolve by natural selection? And if you formalize it properly, basically this, you can answer it, okay? And for example, one of the early, one of the immediate results that you get is that the function has to be learnable in the mathematical computer science sense, and in fact statistically so. In other words, you have to be able to learn it not by examples, but you have to learn it by just getting getting as feedback statistics of the examples that you submit. And in other words, evolvability is a quite restricted form of learnability. Okay, so that's the. It's a beautiful theory. It was recently proposed by Valiant, and there is a lot of interesting work on this. Okay, so I want to tell you about a few things that some recent work of over the past 5 years by myself with a postdoc at Berkeley, Adi Livnat, who is now a professor at Virginia Tech, and several others, including Mark Feldman of Stanford. So another connection between evolution and computer science is the fact that evolution has inspired programmers to develop a genre of algorithms. And I'll remind you what it is. To solve an optimization problem, you create a population of solutions. You think of them as genotypes. And these genotypes procreate through sex, in other words, genotype recombination. And the success whereby the intensity whereby they procreate is proportional to the objective function value. Imagine it's a maximization problem. And since the best solutions create more offspring, eventually you expect that some very good solutions will arise in the soup, in the population. So that's the theory of genetic algorithms. And then there is another genre of algorithms that come that are inspired by evolution, and they're called local search, but the catchy name that they recently have are simulated annealing. And basically what they're inspired by asexual reproduction. And basically mutations are adopted with probability increasing with fitness, of the differential in fitness, in the objective, and decreasing with time, and in the end you select the best solution we have seen. This is another extremely commonly used approach to heuristics for hard problems. And again, it's inspired by evolution, this time by asexual evolution. Okay? The mystery of sex deepens. Here is why. Because simulated annealing, in other words, asexual reproduction, works fine. In the sense that there are practitioners who swear by it, who have chosen it after trying many approaches, whereas genetic algorithms don't work. Okay, and I know I'll make enemies every time I say this. Okay, but believe me. Okay, it's a fact. Okay, so here's what I mean by that. Okay, that I'm not aware, and I have looked of an application where genetic algorithms have been tried along with many other approaches and emerged victorious. Okay, emerged as the best, as the preferred way to solve a problem. And this is extremely puzzling because in nature the opposite happens. Sex is very successful and ubiquitous. Okay, in other words, if you look at the tree of life, you'll find in the leaves some asexual species, but there is one here, one here, one here, and one there. Okay, so and these species are twigs. Okay, this means that they came from sexual species who lost it. Okay, for various reasons. And so, what is this strange phenomenon that nature's favorite trick falls on its face when programmed on a computer? Okay. And so the story is this. I mean, that the first time I met Adi Livnat, we talked at the Nefeli Cafe for 3 hours. And in the end of these 3 hours, I told him this thing that had been this question that had been tantalizing me for years. And we spoke about it for a while. And then we looked at each other and we had sort of, this radical thought. What if sex is a mediocre optimizer of fitness? Expectation of offspring. What if sex optimizes something else? And what if this something else is the secret advantage of sex? And we thought about it, and we consulted with Mark Feldman and Jonathan Dushoff and others, and we found it. And that's mixability. In a recent paper, we do simulations which establish in black and white the following: that natural selection under A-sex optimizes fitness. Nobody's surprised by that. We all knew that. It's very easy not to prove it mathematically also. But natural selection under sex, it optimizes mixability, whereby mixability, I mean the ability of alleles, gene variants. I'm going to define it a little more formally soon. The ability of alleles to perform well with a broad spectrum of genetic partners. In other words, it's a measure how an allele, by allele I mean a variant of a gene, how tolerant it is of other alleles of other genes, okay? And the more tolerant it is, the more mixable it is. Whereas, in other words, an allele, you call it mixable, roughly speaking, and heuristically, and I'm going to give you a definition soon, if it may not perform extremely well with any other partner, or partner combinations, but it performs adequately with nearly all. Okay, so let's explain a little. Okay, so this is the fittest landscape of a two-gene organism. Okay, this is gene A, gene B. These are 4 alleles, 4 variants, 5 variants. Okay, what are these entries? These entries are the fitness of the combination. In other words, if an organism has this allele and this allele, then its fitness is 4, which means that on the average, roughly speaking, this organism is going to procreate, to have a litter of 4, okay, to have 4 fit surviving children. So these are terrible ideas. This is amazing. This is great. Okay, so once you have this, you can compare asexuality with sex with sex, because in A-sex, it will select the largest numbers in this matrix. Okay, so an asexual species will basically, everything else will become extinct, and only these genotypes will survive, and eventually even this will go away. Okay, and that's trivial mathematics. You know what is much harder to prove mathematically, but it's true, is that sex will select the rows and columns that have the largest average. Okay, and that's what mixability is. And again, I'm hiding things under the rug, but roughly speaking, that's what it is. So let me show this in pictures. Here is another fitness landscape, and now it looks a little more like a landscape, all right? I mean, because I have put it in 3D. And here are 3 elements of the landscape. These are the peaks of the landscape. These are the troughs or valleys of the landscape. In other words, you don't want to land here. These are great places. And here is a third feature, the plateau. Okay, what's a plateau? A plateau is an allele 5 of gene A in this particular case, which does fine with a large variety of other alleles. And in this particular case, where the matrix is such that the dynamical system is linear, and we can therefore analyze it, in this case, is sort of, a proof of concept. Okay, in this case, you can prove that. So here is the theorem. In the landscapes of this form, unless the peak is so huge that it's twice the height of the plateau, in other words, unless the peaks are ridiculously high, in sexual reproduction, the plateau will dominate eventually, and the peaks will become extinct. In other words, the fittest will not survive, okay? And then something else will survive. In asexual reproduction, the peaks will always dominate, and the plateau will become extinct. Okay, so that illustrates even, by arguments following not by simulation, not from simulations, but from Peano arithmetic. I mean, you can prove something like that. All right. And why is it that that mixability is the method of choice, is the metric, I should say, of choice for in evolution? And the answer is that plateaus accelerate evolution. Why? Because imagine that all your genes, all your alleles are plateaus. Okay, what does it mean? It means that they are very tolerant, very relaxed genes. Okay, this means that if another gene does something unusual, they are not going to throw a fit. Okay, and this means that that this encourages experimentation, and evolution is accelerating, and this acceleration eventually will go so wild that there are going to be subspecies, and eventually they are not going to be able to mate, and therefore there's going to be a new species. And new species change the landscape. And in the new landscape, the asexual species, which had very meticulously optimized its genes for that landscape, now it has the carpet pulled from under. Sir?
Question during or after?
Sure, yeah. From you to during, yes.
What's the difference between mixability and ESSs? Is that basically the same?
It's no. So
what's the question?
What is if there's a connection between mixability and evolutionary stable strategies? It's completely different. It's in other words, I cannot tell you if they are similar or different because they belong into different mathematical contexts, so I mean, mixability is going to be eventually be an equilibrium, but not a Nash equilibrium. So because you don't play a game here. Okay, so in other words, there is there is no rationality. There is nothing of the sort. So the point is that in the new landscape, sex will select more plateaus, and that's how things will continue. Okay, so this is now, what I told you before is black and white math. What I'm telling you now is our speculation of why we believe. Okay, and it will be interesting to see how to test this. At least how to argue it mathematically. Why we think that mixability is the right concept for evolution. Incidentally, if you ask me what lessons can you draw from this for genetic algorithms, here's what I think. Okay, what you draw from the this tells you about genetic algorithms is this: that genetic algorithms might be a fantastic idea if your objective is fuzzy or time evolving, or you are not sure about it. Okay, if there is multi-criterion. Bob.
So this hypothesis is independent of changes in the environment. Yes, even in a stable environment.
Yes, that's right. I mean, but I mean, what is the environment? Okay, I mean, okay, meteorites do hit. Okay, but appearance of new species, that's a huge environmental change. Okay, so so if you accelerate speciation, this accelerates the change of the environment. Done.
So you're considering one gene against another, and then that mixes all the genes somehow together. I mean,
So it's not two genes; it's many genes also. So
it's many genes. It's not a matrix; it's a tensor.
No, it's a tensor. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
You're making an assumption for only single metrics. People in optimization theory work with multiple metrics and show there's a big advantage to them.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Precisely. I mean,
It could be both here.
Yeah. That's what I'm. Oh, I see. Both mixability and
just more than one metric. You can show actually, in order to get global convergence, you might need more.
Okay, I'm not. So you misunderstood. I'm not saying that I found the right metric that is being optimized. Okay, even though I do have results that seem to point in that direction. Okay, that I'm not showing today. But what I'm saying is that the certainty implicit and explicit in the literature that natural selection optimizes fitness misplaced. Yeah. Tom.
It seems to be asexual mechanisms are prone to getting stuck in local minima because they're doing very local optimizations. Are the sexual techniques
No, they define global minima.
Are they-
They define global optima.
they're better at avoiding
But,
getting
but,
stuck in
the,
the
but, the
local
point,
optima?
but the point is that if the environment changes, then they're stuck. Okay?
That's why multiple metrics.
Well, precisely. I mean,
Okay,
also,
it's locally stuck.
yeah, yeah.
Any
We knew from Fisher and Wright, sort of, that it's diversity that accelerates evolution. Okay, so of course, I mean, I'm not. What I'm saying is that an implicit premise in all of evolution theory was inaccurate. Okay, so that it's not fitness that is being maximized. Okay, so it's in several cases it's something else. Why two?
Sexes.
Why two sexes? Why two genders? This is a completely different question. I think that I think we know the answer. I mean, if you want, I can interrupt and tell you. So Amin asked why are we stuck with two genders? Okay, so what do you have in mind? I'm joking. Yeah. Here is an answer. Okay, so that I forget. I don't remember who proposed this. I mean, but it's folklore. So how did genders come about? All right. I mean, so what happened is that in the beginning there were one cellers, and basically they were exchanging DNA, sort of, and that was it. And then multicellular organisms appeared. All right. And they had somebody who eats and digests. They had somebody who does sort of moves. Somebody and so on. I mean, they had specialized organs, and it was reasonable to have somebody who does sex. Okay, a particular part of the multicellular algorithm that specializes in exchanging DNA, and therefore, let's call them gonads. Okay, so they had part of these. There will be cells that will be gonads. All right. And now your job is, as a species, is to create the most how do you call it, the most effective gonads. All right? How do you do that? So basically, it's the following problem. Imagine that you have that you want to create robots, okay, that you are going to let go in the desert, and their job is to find other robots, okay, and do some business. All right? And the question is, how do you do that? What is the best design? And it turns out, if you think about it, there are two designs. One is to have tiny, agile, light robots with almost no fuel at all that will dash for it and die. Okay? And the second design is to have a huge tank with lots of fuel that stays there and waits for the blighters to come and get it. Okay? And these were the two strategies. Okay? And basically this ODE sort of had two equilibria. And some organisms went one way, some organisms went the other, and we call the former females and the latter males. Okay, this is what people believe that might be the origin of the two genders. Okay, in any event. So let me tell you another story. Do you know about pointer dogs? Pointer dogs are hunting dogs that what they do is when there is an animal in the environment, they just in this room they would be crazy, okay? But I mean, when there is an animal in the environment, they just point to it, okay? And Darwin was this is Darwin, by the way. This dog is pointing to the young Charles Darwin. Darwin was extremely interested in pointer dogs, and actually he befriended the shady characters in the suburbs of London who bred them. Okay, and the way you breed pointer dogs is the following: you take good hunter dogs, you treat them to point, you teach them to point, then you get the best pointers and you breed them, and you take their puppies and you teach them to point, and then you repeat a couple of generations, and then puppies are born who point. Okay? It happens. All right, so that's very strange. So Darwin was fascinated by this. Okay, so this pointer dog is pointing at Waddington. Waddington is one of the greatest experimentalists of the 20th century in biology, and I'm going to tell you one of his experiments, one of his most famous experiments. All right, and basically what he did is he took a bunch of flies, and in room temperature, and then what he did is he raised the temperature, and then he noticed that a few of them, like 15% of them, undergo some phenotypical change. Okay, because of the, let's say their head becomes red, even though it's something with the wings. Okay, so but I didn't know how to do with the wing. Okay, so let's say the head becomes red, and then what he does is he takes them and breeds them, takes the red-headed ones, and breeds them. At this point, somebody asked me, what did he do to the others? Okay, so I didn't know what I said. He looked like a nice guy to me. Probably opened the window. So here is an interesting thing. Okay, so he bred them, and in the next generation, guess what? What do you guess? 60% were red-headed. And then he kept doing the same thing, and then this, 63. And then generation 20, 99, but all of them were red-headed. Okay? Fine, no problem. So here is the amazing thing. Can you guess what he did next? Yes. Yeah. Good, excellent. He lowered the temperature. And lo and behold, a few of them stayed red. Which is an amazing thing, if you think about it. It means sort of, that a Scandinavian couple goes to Crete for the summer, and then sort of, then they become all black, and then they go back, and their baby has lots of melanin, and what's going on?
Well, they were in Crete.
Give me a break, okay? So, I've been giving this talk. It's the first time somebody bit. Okay, thanks. Okay, okay. So many of them stay changed. Okay, and if you think about it, this is so what call this genetic assimilation. It's adaptation to the environment that becomes genetic. Okay, and if you think about it, this is the ghost of Lamarck. Okay, but don't worry. Okay, here is a genetic explanation. Imagine that redhead is this Boolean function. Okay, in other words, redhead means that you have 10 genes, 0, 1 valued, and x1 plus x2 plus x10 plus 3 times an environmental Boolean variable, which is 1 if it's high temperature and 0 if it's low temperature, is greater than or equal to 10. In the beginning, and suppose in fact that the genes are independent random variables. So remember this function, all right? I mean, basically it says that the sum of the genes plus 3 times t is 10. So what happens? When t is 0, this will never be satisfied, okay? Because probability satisfied is 1 in 1,000 or million or something, okay? So, it will never happen. And so you will never see a red fly. But if you raise the temperature, then a few of them become red, okay? Why? Because now the sum has to be greater than or equal to 7, okay? And okay, 10 Bernoulli variables, sure, 7. And if you select them and breed them, then 60% will be red, okay? Why 60%? Watch. Here is the story, that you have this curve because it's sum of Bernoullis, okay? And then you cut it off way up to the right, and that's bad because nothing is there. And then by lowering raising the temperature, you bring this cutoff point to the left, and now there is enough stuff here, okay? So you'll see about 15% of your flies to be red. And now you take them and breed them, and what happens, okay? Now the ones are going to be the average number of ones, expected probability of ones in this slice, and this shape its mass is very concentrated to the left, right? Because that's after all a Gaussian, right? And so the average is going to be very close to here. And the next generation is going to be like this. And here is your 60%. You see? That's 60%. That's a little bit above 50%. And of course, this is going to now, by further breeding, is going to move to the right until enough will be, this probability will become so high that enough of them will be more than, enough flies will have 10 ones. Okay, so that's the explanation. And here is a way to generalize it, okay? So, and I want to turn this into a fascinating problem about Boolean functions, okay? Imagine that you have a Boolean function, any Boolean function, with n variables. That's showing work with Greg-Valiant. N variables x1 through xn. And there is no environmental variable now, okay? So we are just into sort of, you have some genetic combinations. And they are independent with probabilities p1, p2, pn. Okay, so let's call this vector p. And now generate a population of bit vectors, flies, and select the ones that satisfy the Boolean function. Okay? And if you think about it, p becomes something else. And in expectation, what p becomes this, p prime, where p prime sub I is the probability under p that the ith variable is 1, condition on the whole Boolean function be 1. Because what you do, you generate a probability, you generate a population with probability p. You select those that satisfy the Boolean function, and then you measure what is the chance that what is the density of 1 alleles into this soup. And here I'm shoving something very important under the rug because I'm disregarding genetic linkage. Okay. All right. But here is a wonderful conjecture which I don't know how to solve. This solves satisfiability. It would not contradict what we believe, okay? Because this is an exponential algorithm. But still it would be amazing if this way you can develop a population of solutions that all satisfy a Boolean function. Okay? In other words, what I'm telling you is that this will eventually converge to a situation in which some variables are definitely 1, some others are definitely 0, and these satisfy the Boolean expression. And we don't know how to prove this, okay? But I think it's a wonderful conjecture. But you can prove something better. Here's what you can prove. If instead of this, p goes to not to p prime, but epsilon p prime plus 1 minus epsilon p. In other words, if the Boolean function does not confer, is not a death or life advantage, but it's a slight competitive advantage, evolution advantage, then this algorithm converges to satisfy an assignment with probability 1. And of course, the caveat is for large enough population and small enough epsilon. Okay? And so that's the theorem. And if you ask yourself, this is very strange. How come you cannot prove it for the strong algorithm and you can prove it when you weaken the algorithm, right? And here is the answer, okay? And the optimizers among you will understand now. It turns out that this is very closely related to gradient descent, okay? And gradient descent is known to misbehave if you don't tone it down, okay? And it's a lot more than that. And in fact, this theorem, to prove it, you have to take care of the linkage thing, but it turns out that you can. Okay, so it's a difficult theorem. So neither of us is eager to write. So that's why we're postponing. But we know it's true, and
What's the rate of convergence?
Exponential. Cool. All right. So interpretation is the following, that if there is any Boolean combination of a modestly large number of alleles that creates an anticipated trait conferring even the smallest advantage, then this combination will be discovered and eventually fixed in the population. Okay, which is surprising. I mean, it basically says that a new trait can emerge in the whole population in parallel without any mutation. Okay, so there was no mutation here. Okay, just given enough time, the population noticed that there is this slight advantage in this particular Boolean combination. Or if you wish, with sex, all moderate-sized Boolean functions are evolvable. Okay. So here's what I want to tell you.
Did the sex come into this?
Oh, without sex, oh, sex comes in everywhere. Okay. Yeah. So without sex, this would be impossible. Okay, because sex means that the genes were mixed enough. Okay, so that you could sample from the in other words, the zeros and the ones had to be mixed so that you could sample from otherwise it wouldn't have happened.
Does that line work in bars? Does that line work in bars?
I haven't tried it. Okay, so really, I don't think I have to convince you about that. So the theory of life is amazing, and I really believe now that the point of view of computer scientists makes it more tantalizing, and even it may even help make progress. This concept of mixability helps understand the role of sex, and I showed you also a natural stochastic process on Boolean functions, which may help illuminate genetic assimilation, in other words, Waddington's phenomenon, and the emergence of novel traits. Okay, so thank you very much. Oh, please, yeah.
I thought that it's been shown that epigenetic markings on the DNA can be acquired during life and passed on to the descendants. Doesn't that get Lamarck out of the doghouse?
Of course, definitely. I mean, so Lamarck has recently returned from the darkness. Yes, I mean, because there is a lot of non-AGCT information that is passed on to our offspring, and this can be acquired during our lifetime. But there is, of course, a heated debate among evolutionists how important this is. Okay, so I believe that there is the best paper I read about this. The title is, I believe, Weissman rules. Okay, so what I told you before, that Weissman said that it's one way and forget about it. Okay, is really true. Bob.
Well, survival of the fittest has been used as a very powerful metaphor in society.
Of course.
How would you care to hypothesize what this really means in terms of what is the right metaphor?
So it's not the survival of the fittest, it's the proliferation of the tolerant. Okay.
Proliferation of the tolerant.
Well, you asked me, okay? You challenged me, okay? So sort of. Yeah.
So does that mean survival of the fit?
Right. So I mean, it's of course survival of the fittest is ultimately correct. Okay. So so if you ask me, it's the mathematical definition of fitness in the context of the Fisher-Wright model that needs a redefinition. In other words, what does it, what Darwinian fitness, what does it correspond to in the mathematical model of population genetics, of population statistics, population genetics, and it could be that some kind of mixability is the right answer.
But fitness, a fittest implies competition. That is, you've got two species and it's the fitter one that's going to survive. Whereas you'd like to say
no, it's competition. It's usually meant to mean competition between organisms of the same species.
Of the same species,
right.
certainly.
Yeah.
But even so, the survival of the fit is another possibility where it doesn't matter whether you're competing or not. You just want to survive, and you want to be able to fit. In the sense that you can, for example, survive changes in the environment, adaptability.
Yeah, I agree. So exactly. I mean, so I totally agree that maybe what our point of view brings out is a need for redefining exactly how to mathematically express the concept of fit. I agree.
Convergence rate of these processes understood? I mean,
The convergence?
Yes, how fast? Because it seems to me the sexual version explores a much larger space and then maybe much slower.
The sexual?
Yes, no, because
Yeah. So
especially if, as you said at the end, the advantage is very slight, which can take forever to.
Right. So convergence, sort of, in some sense, convergence is not very interesting, okay? Because life never ends, okay? So basically, and by the way, by the time, somewhere in the transient, you are going to have some mutation that is going to change everything, right? I mean, add new parameters and so on, okay? So that's,
There are very few generations, right, in the fly experiment.
True, yeah.
And it doesn't sound like to me from this theory, this would happen very fast.
I mean, from the second half of my talk, there was a real, very clean divide between the two. So, yes, I mean, and we know that the convergence is exponential. For the first part of my talk about mixability, what convergence comes in, but in the following sense, that there is one very tantalizing question to which I don't pretend to understand, okay? Which is, how come people had not observed this for 90 years, okay? I mean, they had been playing with this simple mathematical model for 90 years, okay? And one answer that Adil, if not told me, is that that's his favorite answer to this, is that people had been either concerned with the first couple of steps of this, which is easy to simulate, or with the asymptote, the equilibrium, okay? And this is a phenomenon that happens in the transient, okay? And that's and the transient, life is a transient, okay? So.
On this question of time scale. So how come exponential time, is not good for game theorists, but it's acceptable for biology?
Okay. So so I hope they don't read my other papers, right? So yeah. So I'll tell you what, okay? I guess what I'm saying here is that this is a credible piece of argument when you are talking about tangents. When you are talking about a polygenic property that depends on a few genes, not hundreds. Yeah, and then it also begs the question, which is I think a wonderful question, and we have just started thinking about what are families of Boolean functions for which the convergence varies.
Polynomial time and polynomial space differ in the sense that polynomial space is more like parallel computing.
Right.
So there's a lot of parallelism here. Should we be looking at time or space complexity?
I don't know. So yes, I mean, you have populations. I mean, so it's parallel evolution. So yeah, it is more space. I mean, even though I don't think that enough people have thought about this yet.
So it seems to me that the role of sex is to choose a stable point. So in optimization, does it mean that it favors a point where the partial derivative is near to zero? So it means that it's vulnerable to be trapped in a local minimum, local maximum.
It's not, a local maximum does not I don't know what exactly it means. It's true that sex will eventually keep more how do you call it, more diversity, and it's going to ignore some very good global maxima. Yeah.
Any questions for Christos? Christos, thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.